Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Again, this is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025 at 2:34 in the afternoon. So before we go to the floor, we have the pleasure of having former Commissioner of Department of Financial Regulation and now with NCCI join us. So Susan, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the committee.
Good morning.
Having a deja vu, but it's been 8 years since I've been back at the State House. So I have some things to tell you, some stories to tell you. So I am Susan Donegan. I'm the Chief Regulatory Officer at NCCI, which is the National Council on Compensation Insurance. So we're talking about workers' compensation insurance right now. I was the commissioner at the Department of Financial Regulation, and as I said, I've left that post about 8 years ago. And while I haven't had the pleasure of working with most of you, certainly I've had a lot of history with the chair, and we've done some pretty good work in those past years. And so thank you for the invitation to come see you all today. You may not be familiar with NCCI, and that's because we're a quiet group. We like it that way. But the role that NCCI plays in fostering a healthy workers' compensation system really is key to that sector. Let me say at the outset that NCCI is not an insurance company. We do not lobby. We are a neutral organization that, if I give you the right picture, you'll see that we basically are a data collection and a data analysis organization that supports the workers' compensation sector. We are a 100-year-old company based in Boca Raton, Florida, which is a wonderful place this time of year. Not so much in the summertime. We have over 800 employees, and we operate as a not-for-profit organization. That is, the insurance companies that write workers' compensation are assessed fees based on their market share that acts as our income. So it's not unlike what happens over the Department of Financial Regulation, where the charging for fees and premium tax helps to support that organization. But for us, it means that the insurance companies are ostensibly our owners. Now, while NCCI was created 100 years ago, it was at the direction of insurance regulators it was created. And that was because 100 years ago, there was an incredible volatility and price fluctuations in workers' compensation when this sector got off the ground. And I'm very happy to say that if we now go 100 years to today, we have a very stable sector, a very stable one of rates and consistency, and it has stayed stable, and we look to it as being stable in the future. It's about a $200 million market here in Vermont. And that's in about a $1.6 billion property and casualty market. So you see, it's a small part of the property and casualty sector, but a very important one because it is a mandatory insurance that all employers that meet certain criteria must have to cover workers. And the deal is, the grand bargain, if you remember that word, is that in exchange for covering medical expenses and salary for an injured worker, the employer is not subject to civil liability, which is a big savings and a good thing about risk for employers. So let me tell you what NCCI does today, because while we started 100 years ago, we have morphed. We have become a mature organization. And we do collect data and we analyze it from all the insurers that write workers' comp insurance. So we look at things like losses and claims, number of claims. We look at expenses. We look at medical data. And we rely on this data to understand industry trends. It helps us prepare workers' comp premium and rate recommendations that go to the Department of Financial Regulation. So the insurance department can consider how they're going to approve and adopt the rates for the next year. We also propose legislation. So if there's a piece of legislation here at the State House, you can have us take a look at it and we would analyze it. Our actuaries and economists would take a look at it and tell you what our best guess and our calculation is to see how it would impact the sector if the bill was passed, whether it would be a positive, a negative, or a neutral. And remember, we don't lobby, we are neutral. So what we do is we provide you with resources and that type of education. So with me today is my colleague, Justin Moulton, and Justin's over here to my left. He's our senior state relations executive who has the New England territory. And so he was actually over at the Maine State House yesterday, seeing colleagues at also the department over there. I thought it would be good for you to be introduced and reintroduced to Justin, since he is really the liaison for Vermont, works very closely with DFR as well, the Department of Labor. Sitting to Justin's left, as you know Chris Rice with MMR. He's our boots on the ground here. He does not lobby for us. If I catch him lobbying, he's in trouble. But he is our liaison to the legislature as well as DFR and DOL. The other thing that we do is we monitor the laws and regulations as well as legislation that is passed around the country, not just the NCCI states, which are about 40 states, but all of the states. We look at all of the statutes, the proposed legislation, the legislation, any regulations that are up for consideration within state departments. And again, we look to see what are the trends that we're being told that are being funneled to us from those state legislators and legislations. And we use those statistics to not only help us understand what the future of the market's going to look like, but as I said before, it helps us establish what we believe the proper rate and ratings and premiums should be and the recommendations for the current or coming year. We want insurance companies to fulfill the promise of providing benefits to injured workers. And so it is very important that when we do things like file a proposed rate recommendation to the commissioner over at DFR, that we've got that body of accurate information behind us so that we know that what we're recommending is right for this geography, for this working world, for the right jobs, for the economy that's in the area. It's a lot of factors that go into it. So I am in charge of the regulatory division, or regulatory services, some people call it. We interface with state and federal governments. We administer what's called the residual market. That's the market of last resort. There are some employers who, for a host of reasons, are not able to secure insurance on the voluntary market. They might be a new company that doesn't have enough history for accurate premiums to be calculated. They might have a very high claim experience that would influence their premium. They also might be in a sector that's got very high risk jobs. Think about electrical workers and folks who go up skyscrapers or offshore rigs. And so you have to have workers' compensation, and this creates a pool for those high risk insureds to be able to secure the insurance they need to be able to operate. For you legislators around the country, and we are supporters of NCOIL, if you have heard of National Council of Insurance Legislators. By the way, if that's something anybody's interested in, I would say spend some time with that organization. You know, in the past, I'm a Vermonter, so we have had a great deal of participation by legislators and even in leadership positions. Kathy Keenan was president of that organization back in the day.
And Chair Botso was.
And Chair Botso too.
Ready to assume that.
He was.
He decided he was going to retire.
So it's not only about workers' comp, but it just gives you the picture of what's going on around the country. And I would endorse that. But when it comes to legislation, there were over 900, close to 1,000 bills around the country that were introduced in state legislatures that were about workers' compensation. Now, about 108 of those bills actually passed. You know how it works. Everything goes in the hopper, a little bit comes out. But what we were able to see was a lot of common themes from state to state about the topics that were important to the legislators. And I'll throw out some things that we have already tackled here in Vermont, but you can imagine some other states will be talking about this year. So we see legislation around the country about mental injuries, PTSD in particular. And, that started back with 9/11 with first responders and has continued with firefighters and public service folks, police, experiencing PTSD on the job for the injuries, horrific injuries, deep depression, and also PTSD. And what we're seeing is there is an expansion almost of the definition of who gets covered by PTSD. In fact, Vermont, last year, you did an expansion of a bill that included some certain state employees, I think firefighters, right? And that came out of this committee. And other states are doing that too. So Connecticut, for example, has gone to a very expansive definition of who gets covered by PTSD. And it's any employees, not just firefighters or first responders. Any employee that receives, that has a diagnosis of PTSD is eligible for coverage on the job. Now think about Connecticut for a moment. They had those horrific school shootings. As an elementary school teacher, I don't think you go to work thinking that you're going to come home with PTSD. Well, wait a minute. I think all elementary school teachers have a level of PTSD, right? But not as we were talking. And so I don't think you expect to go to work and then see your class, under fire. And so Connecticut has said a teacher who has experienced that kind of injury should be covered. And I think we'll be seeing more states going down that road. While we're talking about PTSD, let's talk about hallucinogens and psychedelics. And I'm not talking Timothy Leary. If some of you remember who Timothy Leary was. What I'm really talking about is the science that's going on right now about the use of hallucinogens for deep depression and for PTSD. And that came out with the first study from the military. They did a very good study about vets coming back with deep depression, PTSD, high number of suicide rates, and the use of LSD in a pharmaceutical, medical, supervised way to help those folks start to conquer that disease. And so we've got states that are beginning to see that there's an efficacy for allowing that kind of medical supervision of hallucinogens and psychedelics to be part of treatment for injuries on the job. Let's stay with fun things, marijuana legislation. And while we've kind of conquered that here in Vermont, a lot of states all over the place are up and down, and it's controversial and it's not. It's medical here, it's recreational there. But, it's still federally illegal, even though the Substance Act knocked it to a 1 or a 3, whichever way it went. But, you got problems with insurance companies saying, gee, should I be covering this stuff if it's still illegal? What risk do I have? And so whether or not marijuana reimbursement for workers' compensation purposes, that is, if I am an injured worker and I feel that medical marijuana would help me work my pain and my doctor feels the same thing, would workers' comp be required to cover that as a treatment? Well, insurance companies say it's still illegal. Some states say we don't care at that federal level. What we're seeing some success with things like pain medication and getting people off opioids with a substitute for marijuana. New Jersey said, heck no, you're not covering that in workers' comp. Massachusetts Supreme Court a year or two ago said, heck yeah, you are going to cover that. And there's been legislation over in Massachusetts. So you see, this is all going to work its way through the states, because we always say, if you've seen one state, you've seen one state, right? It's true. It's true. Another topic that we see nationwide is the issue of who's an employee and who's a gig worker, and the definition of that. And, some states have a broad definition. Uber drivers and delivery folks, they're employees. Some states, no way. And then you've got the federal government weighing in. And if you recall, in Trump session 1, his labor department said, those folks are gig workers. They are not employees. They're not entitled to the vast number of benefits, which would include workers' comp. Biden comes in and says, no, we believe the opposite. And we promulgated a reg saying they are employees and should be afforded the benefits, including workers' comp. Now, you can imagine with the administration of Trump 2 coming back in, that the Labor Department may in fact decide to go back to its original idea that those workers will probably not be considered employees. They'll be back to being gig workers. And then the last topic I'll just throw out, and again, it's not a topic we haven't heard about in Vermont, is single payer insurance. During the Shumlin administration, we tried single payer, and for many reasons it didn't go through. And yet, no state has adopted single payer, but a lot of folks in several states legislators have created studies. For example, in Colorado, a bill just went in, pre-bill just went in to do a study over the next 2 years to see what Colorado could do for single payer, who would pay for it, how would it be administered, and it's a very interesting study that they've told the medical school, the School of Public Health in Colorado, to start doing a study and talk to as broadly an audience as possible to gather information. Believe it or not, Texas 2 years ago had a bill in the House, and Texas goes dark every other year, that said, think about single payer. And it was one of the first bills they actually saw put language in there about how to pay for it. And they had a formula that included Medicaid and this and that and the other thing. It did not go anywhere. But there are conversations happening in other states about single payer. The question is, will something happen as Medicare for all at the federal level? I don't think with the new administration we'll probably see that. But that's an issue that is out there, and it's gaining conversation every now and then. So if all this intrigues you to no end, and you can't sleep at night because you've got this tough day here at the State House, go on our website, ncci.com. We got a lot of stuff on there that you can play with. We've got interactive maps that show legislation. You can dial down. You can look at what your neighbors are doing in New England. You can pick up thought leadership articles that are economically focused. It talks about the job market. We've got things about the residual market in there. I think if you have 5 minutes, take a look in it, especially if you're having to think about workers' comp, if there's a bill that comes in here, just to orient yourself about what's going on in other states. Last year, there were 3 bills that touched workers' comp that came through here. I think I just mentioned one was about the PTSD expansion, and then there were some housekeeping bills. But that's who we are. Justin and Chris are, as I said, boots on the ground. I believe we have submitted a 1-page little factoid for you so that you would have that and contact information. And if you have questions for me now, happy. Questions in the future. And I just want to say separately, as a Vermonter, thank you for your service. And you are sitting on one of the best committees I ever appeared before as commissioner.
I was vice chair.
It's good working with everybody. So it's nice to meet all of you. Yeah. And this guy used to sit and nag me too. He couldn't stand not seeing me up here again. How'd I do?
Had to come back.
So,
Any questions for Susan?
well, then I'll let you get on. Are you going to the floor soon?
Shortly, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
It's good to meet you. Good to see you.
We'll see you again soon. Yeah, Chris, Justin, good to meet you. Thank you. So maybe that will conclude our day. We're off the floor. So back here at 8:45 tomorrow morning, not 9. We'll have a chance to meet with UVM intern. And also, if anyone is, you have your committee assignments, your liaison, if you have a chance to take a look and see what they have posted on their wall, if there's anything to report, that's the time where we'll do that as well. So.
In your email.
Oh,
Okay, gotcha. So that's that first thing Friday morning each week.
Yeah.
You'll do that. That will be the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
If there's, as you're looking at things, if something pops up that you think we should know, just let one of us know up here that you spotted something and maybe we want to take a closer look at it, but. Okay, Well, have a good evening, good work again today.